The afternoon sun poured through the small kitchen window, washing the walls in a tired golden light. Mariam sat cross-legged on the floor, cutting vegetables in rhythmic silence. Her eyes, however, were fixed on her co-sister, who stood by the water tap, washing a pile of clothes with her delicate hands. Despite having a washing machine in the house, the elder sister-in-law, who practically ruled everyone, forbade its use. So the young widow scrubbed the laundry manually, her soft hands soaked in soapy water, her forehead glistening with sweat. There was something ethereal about her beauty, something that pain had failed to erase. Her face glowed like a full moon, her large black eyes shimmered with quiet sadness, and her soft pink lips carried both grace and grief. Mariam often found herself staring at her, mesmerized by the rare combination of innocence and maturity that lived on her face. It wasn't jealousy, it was admiration, an unspoken respect that slowly grew into a strange attachment. The harsh voice of the elder sister suddenly shattered the calm. "Will you take all day cutting those vegetables?" "Go and prepare the curry quickly," she yelled from the doorway. Then she turned toward the widow, barking orders with even more authority. "And you! Stop wasting time. Hang those clothes on the roof and clean my room after that." Without waiting for a reply, she stormed away, leaving behind a silence heavy with humiliation. Mariam glanced at her co-sister, whose face had turned pale, her eyes glistening but tearless. She looked away quickly, swallowing her own anger, and returned to chopping vegetables. This had become her daily routine, cooking, cleaning, and watching her co-sister bear endless insults. From the very first day of her marriage, Mariam had realized that the house wasn't a home. It was a kingdom ruled by tyranny. The mother-in-law was long dead, and the throne was now occupied by the divorced elder sister who treated everyone like servants. Even Mariam's husband, Zishan, obeyed her blindly. He never defended his wife, never raised his voice, and never questioned his sister's cruelty. If Mariam was still standing in this house, it was only because of the widow, her gentle, kind co-sister who treated her like a younger sibling. Without her, Mariam would have broken long ago. Between her husband's indifference and her sister-in-law's constant insults, only that soft presence gave her a reason to stay. And yet, as she stirred the pot of curry that afternoon, Mariam didn't know that her life, so full of quiet suffering, was standing on the edge of a revelation that would change everything she thought she knew about love, loyalty, and betrayal. The house became a silent battlefield, where words were weapons and endurance was survival. Every morning began with commands from the elder sister. Every night ended with exhaustion and unspoken tears. Yet, within this suffocating routine, Mariam found a small refuge, her co-sister. They were two women bound not by blood but by pain, finding comfort in each other's quiet company. When chores ended and the elder sister went out for errands, the air in the house changed. Laughter returned for a while. Mariam would lock the door behind her and rush to the living room where her co-sister sat, resting after hours of labor. They would sit close together, talk softly, and share stories of what life could have been. Sometimes, Mariam would rest her head on her co-sister's shoulder, whispering, "How long will we live like this? There's no love, no peace." Zishan listens to his sister more than to me. Her co-sister would look at her with eyes that carried both empathy and quiet sadness. "You're lucky, Mariam," she would say gently. "At least your husband is alive. You can still hope for change. I sit here every day knowing that mine will never return." There was no bitterness in her voice, only a deep ache. "I live in a house that's not mine anymore, under a roof that reminds me of everything I've lost." Her words left Mariam silent. She looked at at that serene face hiding oceans of grief, and felt a sudden wave of affection. "You have me," Mariam said, holding her hand. "Don't ever think you're alone." The widow smiled faintly, brushing her fingers across Mariam's hair. "I know, my dear. You're like the sister I never had. But be careful. Zishan doesn't like when you spend too much time with me. He thinks people might talk." Mariam froze. It wasn't the first time she had sensed her husband's unease, but hearing it confirmed stung her deeply. Why would he care who I speak to? She whispered. Her co-sister sighed. Men don't need reasons. Sometimes they just listen to others and stop thinking for themselves. That day, Miriam saw her co-sister not just as a woman, but as a mirror, both of them victims of the same cage, controlled by the same authority, breathing the same sorrow. What neither of them knew was that this shared bond of compassion would one day push them into a storm neither could escape, a storm born not from hate, but from the quiet closeness that love sometimes disguises. Days slipped into weeks, and Miriam began to notice that Zishan was no longer the man she had once spoken to for hours during their engagement. The warmth that had once lived in his voice was gone. He rarely looked at her when he came home, and when he did, it was with the mechanical courtesy of obligation, not affection. He would eat his meal quietly, answer her questions in brief words, and spend the rest of the evening in his sister's room. At first, Miriam tried to convince herself that he was simply tired from work. She stayed patient, preparing his favorite meals, pressing his clothes, and waiting each night for him to start a conversation. But nothing changed. The gap between them widened like an invisible wall. One built not from anger, but from absence. Whenever she tried to ask what was wrong, he would brush it off. You think too much, Miriam. Everything's fine, he would say, without even meeting her eyes. But she knew it wasn't fine. Love wasn't supposed to feel this cold. She could feel herself becoming a stranger in her own marriage. The elder sister-in-law made things worse. Her voice filled every room, criticizing everything Miriam did. Why can't you cook like her? She would say, pointing to the widow. Why do you waste time dressing up? What good does it do? Those taunts cut deep. What she didn't understand was that Miriam had stopped dressing up not out of laziness, but out of guilt. She couldn't bear to stand before her beautiful widowed co-sister looking happy and adorned when the other was forced to live like a ghost in plain clothes. The widow noticed the sadness behind Miriam's quietness. She would sit beside her at night when everyone else had gone to sleep. Don't lose hope, she would whisper softly. Men sometimes need time to find their hearts again. Her words brought temporary comfort, but the ache in Miriam's chest only grew heavier. She tried everything to win Zishan's attention. Soft smiles, gentle care, even silence. But he drifted farther away. And whenever she saw him sitting with his elder sister, speaking in low tones that stopped the moment she entered, her mind filled with questions. Something was wrong, not just in her marriage, but in the very air of that house. There was a secret moving quietly between its walls, one that hid behind every closed door and every unspoken glance. And though Miriam couldn't yet name it, she felt its presence, like the calm before a storm. The tension inside the house had become thick enough to feel. It wasn't just in words, it was in glances, in silences, in the way doors shut too quickly and whispers stopped whenever Miriam entered a room. Zishan, once calm and reserved, now appeared distracted and agitated. His sister's authority over him seemed absolute. Every evening when he returned from work, he would go straight to her room and the two would talk for hours. Sometimes Miriam heard their muffled voices rising, an argument maybe, followed by silence that made her uneasy. One night, unable to control her curiosity, Miriam passed by the corridor and heard her name mentioned. She paused, her heart racing. Zishan's voice was sharp with frustration. I've done everything you wanted. I've obeyed you all my life. What else do you want from me now? Should I take her life to make you happy? His sister's response came cold and commanding. You've already made a mistake once. Don't make another. You know what's right. Fix it before it's too late. Miriam froze. Her stomach turned cold. Were they talking about her? Before she could process anything, the door flung open. Zishan stepped out, startled to see her standing there. His expression changed instantly. Guilt flashed in his eyes, quickly masked by irritation. What are you doing here? He demanded. She stammered, I came to ask if you wanted tea. Without replying, he brushed past her, leaving her trembling in confusion. That night, Miriam lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind spinning. Why did his sister want him to fix something? Why was her own name mentioned in that tone? She thought of asking her co-sister, but decided against it. The poor widow already had enough pain to bear. The following morning, she confided everything to her. The argument, Zishan's anger, the strange way the elder sister had been behaving. The widow listened quietly, her eyes clouded with worry. "Don't speak of this again," she said softly. "Zishan is under pressure. Let them handle it. If you react, things could get worse." Miriam nodded reluctantly, yet the unease inside her grew stronger. Every corner of the house began to feel like it held a secret. Even the walls seemed to listen. And though her co-sister tried to calm her, Miriam couldn't shake the feeling that something dangerous was unfolding around her, something she was meant to discover, but not yet prepared to face. After that night, nothing inside the house felt normal. Zishan grew even quieter, and the elder sister's eyes followed Miriam wherever she went. Sharp, suspicious, cold. The only soul who gave her peace was her co-sister, the young widow whose presence still felt like calm water in a burning desert. Mariam began to spend more time with her, not out of curiosity, but out of survival. Her husband barely spoke to her anymore. The walls of her room felt like a cage. So she found comfort in conversation, in shared silence, in the company of someone who understood what pain truly meant. Every afternoon, after finishing the endless chores, Mariam would slip into the widow's room, bringing tea or fruit. They would sit side by side near the window, their talks drifting from house matters to memories of happier days. Sometimes they laughed softly, other times they spoke of dreams. Dreams that neither of them could live. "You know," Mariam whispered one day, "if I didn't have you here, I would have gone back to my parents long ago. You make this place bearable." Her co-sister smiled faintly. "And you give me reason to smile again, Mariam." It's strange, isn't it? Pain sometimes makes strangers into family. Their bond deepened quietly, like a candle burning in the dark, but Zishan noticed. He began watching them with subtle irritation. If Mariam spent too long in her co-sister's room, he grew cold. If she mentioned the widow's name with affection, he turned silent. Once, he even said harshly, "You don't need to spend your days sitting in someone else's room." It doesn't look good. Mariam had wanted to ask why. What was so wrong about friendship? But something in his tone stopped her. It wasn't jealousy. It was fear. There was a restlessness in his eyes that hinted at something more complicated than disapproval. Meanwhile, the elder sister continued her cruel supervision. She scolded the widow for wearing even slightly bright colors and forced her to live in dull clothes of mourning. Whenever Mariam tried to defend her, she was silenced. "You speak too much," the elder sister would snap. "Learn your place." Each insult made Mariam's heart ache for her co-sister even more. She had begun to love her not only as a friend, but as someone fragile, someone who needed protecting. But beneath that tenderness, something else had begun to stir, something neither woman could name. It wasn't desire nor defiance, but an emotional current that bound them so closely that they no longer realized how deeply intertwined their lives had become. And soon, that closeness would uncover a truth powerful enough to destroy everything they had built to survive. That night, the house was silent, except for the occasional ticking of the wall clock. The elder sister had gone to bed early, and Zishan, as usual, had told Mariam he was going to meet his friends. She had stopped asking questions. The answers never changed. Hours passed, midnight came and went, and still he didn't return. The loneliness pressed against her chest like a weight. Mariam sat by the window, staring at the moonlight spilling across the courtyard. Her thoughts drifted between confusion and longing. What had gone so wrong between her and Zishan? Why had love vanished so quickly, leaving only silence and suspicion behind? The night was thick and heavy with questions she couldn't answer. Then from across the hall, she noticed something, a faint light shining through the crack of her co-sister's door. It wasn't unusual for the widow to stay awake late. Sometimes she prayed at night. Still, something about the glow pulled Mariam toward it. Maybe she needed someone to talk to, someone who would listen. Quietly, she stepped out of her room and walked down the corridor. Her feet barely made a sound on the cool marble floor. She raised her hand to knock, but stopped when the door creaked open slightly under her touch. And then she froze. Inside, under the dim yellow light of a bedside lamp, her co-sister lay on the bed, dressed in a silky black nightgown that shimmered against her pale skin. Her hair, long and dark, flowed over her shoulders. It wasn't the modest image Miriam was used to seeing. It was a picture of raw, unguarded beauty. But what turned her shock into disbelief was not the sight of her co-sister alone, Esmadases. It was Zishan. He was there, sitting beside the bed. For a moment, Mariam couldn't breathe. The room spun around her. Zishan looked up, his eyes wide in panic. The widow gasped, instantly pulling a sheet over herself. The air was filled with silence so thick it screamed. Zishan rose quickly, his voice trembling with anger and guilt. "What are you doing here, Mariam?" She took a step forward, her voice breaking. "No, the question is, what are you doing here?" The widow began to cry, her hands shaking. Mariam's world collapsed around her as realization struck. The late nights, the secrecy, the sudden distance. Everything made sense now. Her husband was not with friends. He was here. And the woman she loved and trusted like a sister had been sharing his nights. The air in the room turned heavy, thick with betrayal. Mariam's hands trembled as she looked from Zishan to her co-sister, the two people she had trusted most. Her voice cracked as she shouted, "Tell me this isn't true! Tell me I'm not seeing what I think I'm seeing!" Zishan couldn't meet her eyes. His jaw clenched as he muttered, "It's not what you think." Mariam stepped closer, tears blurring her vision. "Then what is it, Zishan? What am I supposed to think when my husband is sitting in another woman's room at midnight, and that woman is my sister-in-law?" Her words cut through the silence like a knife. The widow sobbed softly, clutching the sheet around her as if it could hide the truth. Then in a trembling voice she said, "Please, Mariam, listen to me before you judge." Mariam turned to her, anger burning in her chest. "I treated you like my own sister. I defended you when others insulted you. I shared everything with you, my secrets, my pain, my trust. And this is what you give me in return?" The widow lowered her head. "You don't understand," she whispered. "It's not betrayal. It's something we were both forced into." "Forced?" Mariam repeated in disbelief. "You expect me to believe that?" Zishan finally looked up, his eyes full of shame. "It's true," he said quietly. "After my brother died, she was left completely alone. No family, no home. People started talking, ugly things. I couldn't let her reputation be destroyed. So, I married her." Mariam staggered backward as if struck. "Married her?" The word echoed painfully in her head. The widow's tears flowed freely now. "Zishan did it to protect me. I didn't want to ruin your life, Mariam. But your husband gave me his name so I could live here with dignity. It was supposed to be a name only marriage. Nothing more, but..." Her voice broke. "He began to care for me. And I couldn't stop it." Mariam stared at them both in disbelief. Every emotion collided inside her: rage, grief, confusion. "So all this time," she whispered, "I was living under the same roof with my husband's other wife." Zishan reached out to touch her arm, but she pulled away violently. "Don't!" she cried. Don't you dare touch me! You've broken something you can never fix." In that moment, everything Mariam believed in, love, loyalty, marriage, shattered beyond repair. Mariam stood frozen, her world collapsing around her. The echoes of Zishan's confession burned in her ears. "I married her." Every heartbeat felt like a blade carving through her chest. She couldn't tell whether she wanted to scream, cry, or run, yet her feet refused to move. Zishan stood before her like a man trapped between guilt and helplessness, while the widow sobbed quietly, her head bowed low, trembling in shame. When Mariam finally found her voice, it came out weak and hoarse. "You both talk about dignity, about helplessness. But what about me? What about my dignity? You made me share my husband, my home, my life, and didn't even think I deserved to know the truth." Zishan's eyes softened with regret. "Mariam, I never wanted to hurt you. I thought I was doing the right thing. You were my responsibility, and so was she. I couldn't abandon either of you." Miriam laughed bitterly through her tears. "Responsibility? You call this responsibility, deceiving the woman you married?" The widow crawled toward her, clutching Miriam's hands desperately. "Please, forgive me. I should have told you, but I was afraid. Afraid of losing the roof over my head. Afraid of becoming a burden again. I never wanted to take your place. Believe me, I would have left long ago if Zishan hadn't stopped me." Miriam looked down at the woman she once loved like a sister. There was pain in her eyes, yes, but also truth. She could see the same brokenness reflected in her co-sister's trembling voice. The anger inside her began to fade, replaced by exhaustion. "You both have already destroyed me," she whispered. "What's left to forgive?" Zishan stepped closer, but she didn't move. "Mariam," he said softly, "I promise I will make this right. I'll give you both equal respect. I made a mistake, but I don't want to lose you." Miriam wiped her tears and looked at the widow, who was still crying silently. "I should hate you," she said quietly, "but I can't. You were just trying to survive in a house that never gave you love. You were as much a prisoner here as I was." The widow looked up, shocked by the kindness in her words. Miriam exhaled deeply, her voice trembling but steady. "Maybe I can't forget what happened, but I won't destroy what's left of this family. I'll stay. Not for love, but for peace." And as she said those words, the three of them stood in a room heavy with silence. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but the fragile beginning of acceptance. The days that followed were unlike anything Mariam had experienced before. The house, once filled with whispers and suspicion, now lived under a strange peace. The kind that followed a storm, fragile and uneasy. Mariam spoke little, keeping to her daily chores. Zaishan tried to bridge the distance, helping with small things, attempting conversation, but she answered only when necessary. The wound was still too raw to be touched. The widow, now her co-wife, moved carefully, avoiding confrontation, her every gesture lined with guilt and gratitude. Sometimes, when their eyes met across the room, Mariam saw remorse in her gaze, and for reasons she couldn't explain, it softened her heart. She had spent too much time in anger. Now, all she wanted was calm. One afternoon, as they both folded laundry in silence, the widow finally spoke. "Mariam, I'll leave if you want me to. I can't live knowing I've taken your happiness." Mariam paused, her hands stilling on the fabric. "And where will you go?" she asked quietly. "You have no family, no home. If I send you away, I become what this world has always been to you." Cruel. Tears welled in the widow's eyes. "You don't have to be kind to me. I don't deserve it." Mariam looked at her with a tired smile. "Maybe none of us deserve kindness, but we all need it." That simple exchange shifted something between them. Slowly, Mariam began to accept her reality, not with joy, but with maturity. She focused on building something stable for the child she still dreamed of having. For the future, she refused to let bitterness destroy. Zishan, realizing the depth of the damage he'd caused, started treating both women with equal care. He brought home small gifts, helped with house expenses, and even argued less with his sister. The elder sister, too, had grown quiet, perhaps out of guilt, perhaps out of defeat. The power she once wielded over everyone seemed to dissolve after the truth came out. One evening, Mariam and her co-wife sat together, sipping tea under the faint orange glow of sunset. For the first time in months, Mariam felt something close to peace. The widow said softly, "You're stronger than anyone I've ever known." Mariam shook her head. "No," she whispered. "I just learned that life doesn't stop when hearts break. It just changes shape." That night, as the moonlight poured through the window, Mariam realized she had survived not by winning, but by forgiving. And in forgiveness, she had finally found her freedom. Months passed, and the house that had once echoed with tension began to find a fragile rhythm of harmony. The bitterness that once lived in every corner had softened, replaced by quiet understanding. Miriam no longer felt the same burning pain when she looked at Zishan or her co-wife. Instead, she saw human weakness. The mistakes, the fears, and the fragile threads that bound them all together. Life moved in small, steady steps. Zishan began spending more time at home. He stopped avoiding conversation and started helping with everyday matters, groceries, repairs, little errands that once seemed beneath him. His efforts weren't grand gestures, but Miriam could feel the sincerity behind them. He had realized what it meant to break someone who had only ever wanted love. The widow, too, had changed. She had become more reserved, more thoughtful. The guilt that once haunted her eyes had begun to ease, replaced by gratitude. She treated Miriam with deep respect, not out of obligation, but out of recognition that forgiveness was the greatest gift she had ever received. Together, they managed the house, supported one another, and created a sense of companionship that neither could have imagined months earlier. One evening, while preparing dinner, Miriam noticed the widow humming softly, a rare sight. She smiled faintly and joined in. When Zishan entered and saw them laughing quietly over the stove, something in his expression softened. "It feels like home again," he said. His voice carried both remorse and relief. Miriam looked at him, her heart calm. "Homes aren't built on perfection," she said softly. "They're built on forgiveness." He lowered his head, tears glistening in his eyes. For the first time in years, he seemed at peace. As the days turned into weeks, Miriam found strength she never knew she possessed. The pain had carved wisdom into her heart. She began helping other women in her neighborhood, those trapped in loveless marriages, those judged for choices they never made. Her story, though heavy with betrayal, became a lesson in resilience. One morning, as she watched sunlight spill into the courtyard, Miriam realized that she no longer lived under anyone's shadow. She had not won through anger or revenge, but through grace. Her voice whispered into the silence. "Some storms don't destroy us. They wash away what never truly belonged." And in that quiet moment, surrounded by peace she had fought so hard to find, Miriam finally smiled, not because her life was perfect, but because her heart had learned how to heal.